Welcome to Despicable Maine Deep Dives. Today on the show, Maine renewable energy scam. You know why you're here, to cut through the noise, get the real story, and get it fast. And that's what we're doing today.
That's right. Our focus is, well, pretty sharp. This claim you hear everywhere that 67% of Maine's electricity is renewable. And our sources, they don't just call it optimistic. No, they use words like scam, lie, even political propaganda. Pretty strong stuff. They say it's designed to mislead Mainers.
Okay, wow. So the 67% figure,
Mm-hmm.
our sources are basically calling it a lie. What's the fundamental problem with that number?
Well, the core issue, is that statistic only counts energy generated right here in Maine. It completely ignores what Mainers actually pull from the grid to, turn their lights on or heat their home.
Right. It's like, I think one source had a great analogy. Bragging you baked a pie for your neighbor
Mm-hmm.
while you're actually sitting at home eating a frozen burrito yourself. You make some stuff here to take about, but what's really powering things is totally different.
Exactly. And when you look at what Maine actually uses, the sources point to, well, a lot of imported Canadian hydro, plus natural gas and even oil. It's kind of ironic, isn't it? They talk about leading on renewables, but still rely on what one source called 1970s fuel sources.
So if we want the real picture of what's powering Maine homes, businesses,
Mm-hmm.
we have to look bigger at the whole New England grid. That comes up a lot.
It does. The sources really emphasize that, the ISO New England grid is what truly powers Maine. And the maybe inconvenient truth there, over half of that grid's power comes from natural gas, 50% plus.
50% gas. So where does that leave wind and solar in the actual mix?
Well, according to these sources, they're described as barely a blip. Just background noise is the term used.
Background noise. Okay. So Maine's supposedly pushing all this wind and solar, but what happens when the wind doesn't blow? Or the sun, sets at 4 p.m. in December, which happens a lot.
Yeah, that gets right to the heart of the problem, doesn't it? Intermittency. The data we're looking at suggests wind turbines here only produce power about 30% of the time.
Only 30%.
And solar, even less, like around 15%.
15. Wow. So think about a Maine winter. Dark, super early, freezing cold. Not exactly prime time for solar, is it?
Not at all.
And if the wind's not blowing, then either.
Exactly. One source paints this pretty cutting picture, suggests that during those crucial cold, dark months, Maine's renewable grid is basically, how do they put it, curled up in a blanket doing absolutely nothing.
Ouch.
You need that reliable base power, right? And that's where the limits of wind and solar, at least right now, become, well, painfully obvious, according to this research.
It really makes you wonder then, if this big renewable push isn't primarily about, keeping the lights on reliably, what is the real agenda, according to these sources? They seem pretty convinced it's something else.
Yeah, the argument they make is that in Maine, this renewable push is much more about optics, about creating the image of being green and leading the way,
Ah, the image.
rather than the, practical reality of delivering steady, affordable power. This is phrase used, pretty cynical. Maine is exporting expensive electrons while importing reality.
Exporting expensive electrons. Meaning, we generate some renewable stuff, maybe it costs a lot, maybe it even goes out of state,
Right.
while Mainers are actually using the regular grid power and footing the bill for this renewable show. And speaking of bills, the sources link this directly to rising electricity costs here.
That link is absolutely central to the critique. The claim is these, quote, radical renewal mandates are basically forcing consumers to buy into an energy system that's expensive and, like we said, unreliable. One source even highlights Maine's, get this, 100% tax on electricity sold in the state, which, feels like adding insult to injury.
100% tax. So, okay, who is benefiting from all this then? If it's not the average Mainer trying to, afford heat in January.
Yeah. Well, the narrative laid out in these sources points fingers at wealthy developers, foreign corporations, and the political class, the ones pushing this agenda. And government subsidies get mentioned a lot. Taxpayer money, they stress, being used to essentially prop up these wind and solar projects that might not stand on their own.
And it sounds like it could get even worse, cost-wise, with the big push for offshore wind.
That's a huge concern highlighted, yeah. That the rush into offshore wind will just inflate costs even more. We're talking potentially doubling, maybe even tripling what people pay now. And they bring up the example of Maine's public advocate apparently backing time of use pricing, which gets described in pretty harsh terms.
Yeah, I saw that. A scheme designed to punish you for using electricity when you actually need it. And training you like a lab rat. That's intense.
Yeah.
Well, what's the logic behind that kind of criticism?
The argument is that TOU pricing hits you hardest for using power during peak times evenings, cold snaps exactly when most people need it most, right?
Right, when you get home from work or it's freezing.
Exactly. So it's seen less as efficiency and more as shifting the burden, the cost, onto the consumer instead of, ensuring the grid can actually handle demand affordably in the first place.
It feels like this whole push, or at least how it's being done according to these sources, is actually making the grid less reliable.
That's a major concern raised, absolutely. That by prioritizing these intermittent sources, wind and solar, and pushing out stabler things like natural gas, maybe even nuclear, the grid itself becomes less dependable, which could mean, higher prices down the road, maybe even risking blackouts.
And there was even that mention of a software glitch that apparently always seems to make the bills higher. That sounds a bit suspicious.
The sources definitely treat it with suspicion. They question why these glitches always seem to benefit the power companies and take so long to fix. It just adds to this feeling that the system isn't working for the average person.
Okay, let's talk money. Billions, apparently, being spent on this renewable effort in Maine. Are we actually seeing more energy produced as a result?
Well, according to the figures cited, it's quite the opposite.
Yeah.
One source claims Maine has spent something like $3 billion since just 2019. $3 billion.
Right.
And yet the state is apparently generating about 30% less electricity now than it did decades ago.
Wait, less. Spent billions, get 30% less power.
Yeah.
That's like joining an expensive gym, spending a fortune on gear, and somehow gaining weight. It just doesn't add up.
Doesn't add up is right. It's framed pretty much as a shell game. Taxpayer money goes in one side, flows to politically connected renewable companies, while regular Mainers get stuck with higher bills and, less actual energy security.
Okay, last big piece here. The jobs. We hear a lot about all the green jobs being created. Governor Mills has mentioned big numbers like 15,000, but our sources, they're skeptical.
Very skeptical. That 15,000 jobs claim is directly challenged. The argument is that number is, massively inflated. They say it includes people whose main jobs aren't really in renewable energy generation or building the infrastructure, like roofers, carpenters, general office workers, people who might touch a related project briefly, maybe.
Wow. Okay.
And pretty sarcastically, they point out that even employees of CMP and Versant, the utility companies are apparently counted in that number.
With the utility workers.
Yeah. The implication, sort of tongue-in-cheek, is that even shutting off someone's power for not paying their sky-high bill somehow gets counted as environmental heroism.
With quite a take.
It really underscores their argument. Electricity rates are going through the roof, but the promised jobs boom is largely imaginary, or at least wildly exaggerated. Apparently, an independent study funded by taxpayers even backed up this idea of an overly broad definition being used.
So if we try to wrap this all up,
Yeah.
what's the main takeaway from these sources we've looked at? The core message?
I think the central argument is pretty stark, that this 67% renewable claim isn't an honest picture of Maine's energy reality. It's presented as political propaganda, basically something designed to make things look good, to create this illusion of progress.
All right, the optics again.
While masking policies that actually prioritize political goals and maybe the wallets of certain developers and corporations over affordable, reliable energy for everyday people in Maine.
And the sources suggest there are other ways, better ways to approach energy.
Yeah, they point towards things like maybe investing more seriously in nuclear or leveraging natural gas more effectively, perhaps even more hydropower where feasible. It sounds like a call for more pragmatism.
A more pragmatic approach.
That seems to be the sentiment. A call for policies that actually focus on the needs of Mainers' reliable, affordable power rather than what they see as political games and, lining the pockets of special interests.
Thanks for tuning in to the Despicable Maine Deep Dive podcast. Remember, the United States has been hijacked, so soon living in the United States will be theft of your life. And as always, living in Maine is theft of your life. Every day you are there is just another day stolen.